People are still trickling in, but we will respect everyone's time, and we do have a pretty packed agenda here. So with that in mind, I'd like to welcome you to the Circular Innovation Council's webinar this afternoon entitled Collaboration Opportunities for Accelerating Food Waste Diversion in Canada's IC&I Sector. My name is Joanne St. Goddard, and I am the Executive Director of the Circular Innovation Council, previously known as the Recycling Council of Ontario. So we have a really great crowd of delegates participating in this afternoon, and a knockout panel of experts. Some have been involved in a pilot project or pilot projects for a very long time with us, which we are going to dig into today. And then those at affecting or moving to affect policy in food waste. So with that in mind, we've got sort of a 5-part agenda for you for this webinar today. Talk a little bit about our organization, how we've evolved in the last couple of years to the Circular Innovation Council, and how we were showing up and working to take action in Canada to transition its economy from a linear to a circular one. And in particular, the pilot projects that we are designing and implementing to test systems and markets changed to prove out circularity opportunities in various different sectors, today hyper-focused on food waste, and food waste in particular in the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector. So I'll give you a bit of a background on the organization and our works. I'm going to give the reins over to my colleagues, Katie Moda and Maggie Bain, who have been on the front lines of implementing our food waste pilot projects in various markets across Canada. And also going to then turn it over to representatives from the federal government in both Environment and Climate Change Canada and Agriculture and Food to talk about the hard work that they are pursuing to set the stage for policy developments that will change circularity for food and food loss and waste in the Canadian context as well, supporting more regenerative agriculture and the linkages. We're going to bring everybody together, the hosts of our pilots, both in terms of Alberta and Ontario, to talk a little bit about the experience so far and what those pilots have already taught us in those jurisdictions as well. And then we'll take some time at the end of today's agenda to talk, to give you an opportunity to query us. So without further ado, I am delighted to host and in fact co-host this webinar with our colleagues and experts at the University of Guelph. With that, I'd like Kate Parizeau to just give us a wave. If you don't know Dr. Kate Parizeau, I'm going to talk a lot about her, and she's going to give you a little snippet of the extensive research that she's done to demonstrate why we've partnered with the University of Guelph. They've been tremendous partners for us. But to talk a little bit about the Circular Innovation Council, next slide, please, for those of you who aren't familiar with the organization. Oh, my apologies. If this is not in front of me, I always forget the land acknowledgement. My apologies. So before we move into the media agenda, we acknowledge that we are on the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nation and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. We also recognize that Dufferin County, which is where I'm situated, and our friends from Guelph as well, is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the home of many indigenous peoples today. So we acknowledge and recognize the lands that we are speaking to you from today. Thanks very much for that reminder. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Circular Innovation Council. I mentioned that previously, for about 4 decades, we were known as the Recycling Council of Ontario, and as the name suggests, we worked on end-of-life management issues, predominantly supporting waste diversion and waste reduction in the context and confines, if you will, of the province of Ontario, and took all of that knowledge and historical successes and rolled that up and reimagined ourselves as a national non-for-profit organization known as the Circular Innovation Council. We did that back in 2020 and have been working in that capacity. Really changed the name, but also changed our mandate to look at opportunities to bring to bear all of our waste reduction experiences and policy development that supported more waste reduction in the market, and looked really at opportunities to broaden economies to move towards circularity and to deliver the social, economic, and broad environmental benefits that the circular economy can deliver on. So we work internationally with other like organizations, identifying and porting best practices, and pilot projects such as the one that we're going to be highlighting today, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, are really critical for us to look at what is otherwise a linear system and to try to create and connect and collaborate with both private and public entities to drive more circularity in the market around some of these areas where we are in fact still seeing waste and still losing in terms of value as well, in addition to environment and cost and social implications as well. So we're going to talk about those 3 KPIs, and those are really the 3 pillars that we can deliver on in a circular economy. So we're proud of this transition, and we're working very hard to innovate in the marketplace to prove out where this can occur. We are still a membership organization, and we really dig into and rely on the diversity of our members, both in the public and the private sector. And that diversity of membership, which is now expanding nationally, allows us the opportunity to better understand where the market failures are, where there's still waste generated, where there is still linear economies, and what roles our members can play in helping us create more circular solutions as well. So if you're not a member of the organization and you wish to learn more, we're happy to chat to you about that post-webinar. And our mission, quite frankly, is to put circular economy concepts into action, ergo, a key pillar for us in these pilots. And we do that with by collaborating with many in our membership and beyond. So we really work in 3 pillars of actions. Next slide, please. Policy and advocacy are still a key pillar for the organization. We take our market experience, we take all of the diversity of our members and that inform our policy positions, and we roll that up with our research to try to help public sector entities create effective policies, and we advocate in that regard. We create a lot of resources and services, again, identifying best practices in other jurisdictions and from our learnings, and providing those open source resources and services to the market to change behavior, to influence and inform as well. And then we run a lot of programs that are educational in design and pilot projects, which again create these real market tests that again, feed back into our policy and advocacy resources and services as well. So these are the 3 sort of action areas of the organization. And if you haven't gone to circularinnovation.ca, you will find all of the current works and information about what we do and where we're headed. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we were thrilled and quite frankly blessed with the experts at the University of Guelph, in particular, Dr. Kate Parizeau, who is no stranger to food loss and waste issues. If you've and they have been a critical ally for us, really supporting our works along the way in many facets, very deeply involved in the pilot that we are doing in the context of the city of Guelph and beyond. So if you haven't met Kate, a word about her. She is a professor at the faculty in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Geomatics at the University of Guelph. She studies the social life of waste and has been researching food waste in Canada, in particular for the past decades. So I'm going to ask Kate just to unmic or unmute, I should say, and to say hello and give a few words.
Thanks so much, Joanna. Thank you to all of you for being here today. As all of you know, food waste is a serious issue in Canada and across the globe. It's been estimated that food loss and waste are responsible for somewhere between 9 and 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions internationally. And food loss and waste also represents the waste of all the resources used for growing uneaten food. So things like water, land, fossil fuels. As such, food loss and waste are indicators of systemic inefficiencies in our food value chains. Given our current context of climate change and also unequal access to food in our societies, there's a strong impetus for us to redress these inefficiencies and to rethink these food systems. Food loss and waste are multi-scalar and multi-jurisdictional issues. I tend to think of them as wicked problems, which means that they have diverse causes and will require diverse solutions. So in addition to the kinds of nonprofit and business-led efforts that we are currently seeing focused on food loss and waste, it's becoming clear that government leadership on this topic is also necessary in an ongoing sense. So this might include things like enabling policy, strategic investments. It might also involve things like regulatory guardrails imposed in pre-competitive spaces. We've seen a lot of activity, governmental activity in Canada at the municipal scale. So many municipalities have created programs to prevent residential food waste and to divert organics from landfill. But there are currently fewer alternatives for industrial, commercial, and institutional sectors, despite the large volumes of food and food loss and waste that we see in these spaces. Which brings us to the topic of today's webinar. The Circular Innovation Council has created an innovative pilot project to divert and rescue food waste from IC&I sectors. And they've done this in partnership with the Our Food Future program, which is in itself another innovation, a multi-stakeholder collaboration led by the City of Guelph and Wellington County and funded through Infrastructure Canada. Our research group at the University of Guelph, which includes an amazing group of graduate student researchers, has provided some research support for this project with funding through the Ontario Agri-Food Innovation Alliance partnership. So this is funded through the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. So this project is therefore a microcosm of the kinds of solutions that are going to be required to address the wicked problem of food loss and waste. It's a multi-sector solution with diverse sources of funding and support. It involves multiple scales of government, and it has implication for policy choices. And it also represents the kinds of creative and innovative thinking that will be needed as the urgency of addressing environmental threats increases in the years to come. So as I go to turn the webinar over to the presenters, I would like to thank Dr. Haley Everett, who's a postdoctoral fellow with our research group, for her intellectual and logistical leadership in convening this webinar. Thank you to the Circular Innovation Council for including us in your brilliant, innovative idea. Thank you to the amazing panel of experts who will share their perspectives with us today. And finally, I would like to thank all of you in the audience today for being here and for being part of the community of important actors who are working to address food loss and waste in Canada. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dr. Parizeau. We're going to move now and invite Katie and Maggie also to unmute themselves as well. And they are going to tag team, as I understand it, and bring all of the details of the two food waste pilots that we are focused on right now in both the Guelph area, but also now expanding into the Alberta, province of Alberta as well. So Katie, Maggie, are you able to unmute? I turn the webinar over to you to go through our pilot project.
Hello, thank you, Joanne. I'm Maggie. I'm the project lead for the Guelph-Wellington pilot. And Katie is here also today. She's the pilot project manager. So we're going to be presenting our 2-year interim findings of the pilot project to you today. I'm just going to pause for a second. Classically, Haley, I shared the wrong screen, so I have to now stop sharing and reshare. 1 second.
Maggie, you're good before.
I know it's not bringing my presenter view up. That's the only thing. Give me a moment. There we go. All right. Is it still on the title slide there?
It is.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, yes, thank you all for the introduction. So we're delighted to share our learnings from our pilot to improve organic waste diversion and surplus food recovery in Canada's industrial, commercial, and institutional sector. In the interest of time today, we're only able to share high-level learnings, but much more detail will be provided in our 2-year interim report, which will be made available on our website either later today or tomorrow to all the attendees, and we'll send up a follow-up email to all of you with the link to the PDF for download, as well as an article that we published with Kate Perzo's research group on learnings from the first year of the project. Also, if you haven't noticed already, please use the Q&A function at the bottom to ask your questions about the pilot, and Katie and I, and also the panel when it comes up, and Katie and I will respond to them via that chat during the moderated panel after we're finished our presentation. So I'll be giving some background information on how the pilot works, as well as some high-level impacts, and Katie will be wrapping up with some of our key learnings. All right, so as Kate already introduced, over 50% of all food in Canada is wasted every year. A lot of it ending up in the landfill, while 1 in 6 Canadians do suffer from food insecurity. So the institutional, commercial, and industrial sector, which is also known as the IC&I sector, produces more food than households, 5 to 9 million tons annually, with the majority of this going to landfill. Now, this is a problem because food waste in landfill is the 3rd largest producer of methane, which is a greenhouse gas emission that's 28 times more potent than CO2. And also there's a ton of resources lost there. However, even though organics diversion is serviced in the residential sector, as mentioned earlier, it's not typically provided for the IC&I sector, and businesses have to go out and procure that service themselves. So IC&I food waste generators are often limited to accessing organics collection services because of the cost, especially small and medium generators. As a result, there are few solutions targeting cost reduction for these generators. It's a problem that's more expensive and more complex than businesses and institutions typically have time or money to deal with. So at CIC, we work with municipalities and multiple stakeholders to simplify food rescue and divert organic waste through shared collection services for neighboring IC&I businesses. We do this to reduce diversion costs for the generators, especially the small and medium generators, and reduce the amount of food waste in landfill as well as greenhouse gas emissions, while increasing access to nutritious food and producing high quality compost. All right, so the circular solution keeps resources at their highest value, and I'll click through a flow chart of how it works. So first we engage and we recruit neighboring IC&I businesses from various generators like hospitals, hotels, grocers, manufacturers, restaurants and shopping plazas, as well as offices and multi-res. And we work through site logistical barriers and provide subsidized organics collection costs to them for a risk-free trial of diverting food waste. We also train Guelph-Wellington IC&I participants on the Second Harvest Food Rescue app, which is one of our partners. So businesses with surplus food have a simple way to donate the food to local community service agencies before they dispose of it in the compost. This helps redistribute the food back to the community. We also create efficiencies by consolidating the IC&I organic waste collections in as tight a geographic route as possible, which brings cost reductions to the collection route for the businesses on it. And the collected organic waste, which is very low in contamination, is processed at competitive rates at the local composter. Oh, hold on. So both components of this pilot model, the food rescue and the organic waste diversion, contribute to a circular food system, with surplus edible food being kept at its highest value for redistribution back to the community, and wasted unavoidable food scraps captured to produce high quality compost, which we then circulate the nutrients back to local gardens and farmers' fields. So it should be mentioned that our commercial food waste diversion pilot program is a multi-stakeholder solution, and we've designed it with input from waste industry partners, private sector participants, municipal partners, academics, and food rescue partners. We're grateful for their input and could not have undertaken this pilot without their financial support. We also engage our participating businesses as the pilot moves forward to gain their insights into what the IC&I sector needs, and we're able to take those learnings away and use the information to expand the model to other regions. For example, we are proud to announce we received funding from the Alberta Eco Trust Foundation and support from other sponsors to test the replicability of the model out in the province of Alberta. So we're excited to launch the program in Westlock and Strathcona County this spring. So to give you an idea of the results so far, the pilot uses a data-driven approach to track environmental, social, and economic impacts as we go along. In 2 years, around 16 IC&I businesses and institutions have participated in the Guelph-Wellington region. We've diverted almost 410 tons of surplus food and organic waste from landfill disposal, meaning over 4,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions were avoided from entering the local atmosphere, and produce nutrient-rich compost to improve local soil health. From the food rescue side, we also recovered nearly $215,000 worth of edible food, keeping the surplus food at its highest value and making more than 62,000 meals available to food insecure community members. So in the interest of time today, we're going to share some key interim learnings with you. And as we mentioned earlier, our 2-year interim report will be made available to everyone who attended following the webinar on our website tomorrow. So I'm going to go through a couple of the first key learnings in food rescue and operations of the model, and then Katie will follow up for the last bit on some of the business model and policy topics. So first, our key learnings from the food rescue part of the pilot. In general, we learned that making food donation collection services available through Second Harvest Food Rescue app helped effectively support large food retailers and larger hospitality services like big caterers or event centers. This reduced the volume of surplus food going into disposal while supporting community food security. And the businesses participating in this can see savings in the garbage and compost collection costs by donating food first and keeping that food out of their waste streams. Alongside this, with the help of Second Harvest, we collect weights, food types, and GHG data on surplus edible food. So we can track those impacts as we go along. So an example of one of our participants was a small town grocer, Foodland here, that was looking for an additional option to donate surplus food when the Rural Food Bank alone couldn't handle his store's volume. So using the food rescue app through the pilot, this provided a convenient way for him to be able to connect with other local agencies and further reduce his overall waste volume by 30%, which also helped him reduce the cost he was spending on waste disposal. So also alongside the successes of the food rescue service for generators who produce a consistent larger volumes of food for donation, there's also some challenges we learned about for other subsectors that produce smaller volumes, such as hotels, hospitality, and catering. So these subsectors tend to have different challenges than the larger food generators, like high staff turnover, which limits their donation momentum due to retraining. They also tend to have limited cold storage for donations that aren't being collected right away, as well as in-house costs of having to use takeaway containers to store the donated food while it's waiting to be collected. Further, they have a preference for having one consistent community agent to collect, and that tends to be limited because these subsectors have things like irregular frequency of donations, timing. So things tend to, larger events tend to happen after 5 p.m. and there's less services available then. As well as, like I mentioned, the smaller volume of surplus food for donation and the type of food being donated, especially prepared foods, as those tend to need more urgent collection than ingredients. So from this, we learned basically that additional support is needed regarding how these logistical challenges like staff time, cold chain infrastructure, and need for collection urgency in the hospitality sector should be covered in order to be able to access this source of surplus food for the IC&I sector. All right, so next, moving on to the pilot's organic waste collection model. We've had great successes with local businesses joining, the majority being small and medium-sized businesses searching for an easy and affordable solution to organic waste collection. Happily, we've learned that the model is able to service all 9 of the different IC&I subsectors, from grocers to restaurants and hospitals, retail plazas and manufacturers, and even office buildings and multi-residential buildings. So our smallest generators tend to produce around 2.5 carts per week, while our largest generators, like, for example, the long-term care home we've had on the project since the beginning, Wellington Terrace in Fergus, produces over a ton per week. Additionally, the participants in our program have reported that the logistical advisory service we offer them to tailor initial setup to their business's needs tends to make it like an easier lift for them to participate in the pilot alongside the regular operations that they have to worry about. So this has helped alleviate some of their concerns, such as staff training around source separation and food rescue, as well as efficient kitchen workflow for source separation or finding storage spaces for the parts, either inside or outside. So along the way, we also learned about key operational challenges for the IC&I sector. One being, for this particular model, we're currently offering a 1 day per week collection frequency, but this isn't frequent enough for some of the larger, especially grocery retail generators that need multi-day collections. However, if the model were to scale to a larger regional approach, there would be enough density to offer multi-day collections. So it's not that this can't be offered, it's just not what the current scale of the pilot is at. So additionally, some larger grocery generators needed depackaging services, which limits processor selection. So in Southwestern Ontario, the anaerobic digestion facilities have invested in more extensive depackaging equipment, which is great. But we're currently taking ours to compost. Further, we've learned that a growing percentage of the grocery retailers are cost effectively diverting organics to local livestock farmers that are willing to both collect it and depackage the food that's donated to them. So that's another sort of keeping food at its highest value option that's out there for them. All right, and I'm going to pass along the last bit of the learnings to Katie. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. Okay, just launching into some of the pieces that we've learned around costing, and of course that's one of our primary objectives around cost savings reduction for the businesses participating. I think similar to our pilot model, in general, haulers are looking to achieve a minimum level of efficiency to profitably serve businesses and institutions in any town or city. So in regions like Guelph, where mainly large grocery retailers, colleges, and the odd hospital were diverting organics prior to the pilot. In fact, 95% of pilot participants are new to food rescue and food waste diversion. The large haulers do often require a minimum number of carts to service small food waste generators, and clearly with an eye to reaching their minimum route efficiency. So what does this look like in the market? One of our gourmet food producers, pictured here, was exploring food waste diversion options before learning about the program. And she was quoted nearly twice as much as participants are currently paying in our consolidated collection model. So while a business may see and experience it as a very high premium to do the right thing, the thing that many businesses have told us they want to do, divert food waste. In fact, behind the scenes, it reflects the hauling industry's route efficiency objectives. And so really the key takeaway is that with the pilot consolidating collections amongst these small and medium-sized generators of food waste, the smaller volumes from SMEs really can be diverted cost effectively. The more neighboring businesses that participate, the higher the productivity on the route, the lower the the price. And that's really what the results from our RFI have demonstrated. It is dependent on the route productivity or the efficiency, but we have been able to already see that cost savings of more than 30% below the current price point of $24 to $26 in the Guelph-Wellington region per 240-liter cart are achievable. And it's interesting to note that the price in the RFI is still higher than what larger companies with provincial or national scale are negotiating through their own competitive procurement processes. So we certainly think there's room for improvement when we move to our competitive procurement stage in the next phase. Some of these other pieces I just wanted to put for your interest. These are findings that we want to test and determine how replicable they are, repeatable they are in other pilot jurisdictions, and something we'll be testing in Strathcona County and Westlock. From a challenge perspective, you won't be surprised to learn that most businesses want organics diversion to match the cost of disposal. However, we haven't been able to achieve that. Even with optimized and consolidated collection routing, we're not getting anywhere close to disposal costs. So that, the low cost of landfilling continues to be a key challenge in this space. But on the positive side, despite the higher price point for diversion compared to disposal, businesses are interested. And what we found is that moving our businesses from free collection, where we started in the days of COVID, to cost sharing, and now to this RFI cost range that we received, 75% of the businesses have continued on with organics diversion. They're not all continuing with our model. Some took the learnings and went and sort of implemented organics diversion nationally. But the point is that getting them started is a key part of the battle. And we have some reasons for that sort of further on. So trying to pull a bunch of these pieces together in terms of learnings that we think will be of interest to policymakers. Certainly in a non-regulatory environment, we did want to speak to recruitment and the really important role that municipal, organizational, and industry networks play in engaging the businesses and raising the awareness of this opportunity with them. Our Food Future, Kate mentioned, collaboration between City of Guelph and County of Wellington around a circular food economy was really instrumental in the first couple of years of this pilot. From a motivations perspective, questions we've been asked from other policymakers, participants reported, key reasons for joining were environmental impact and brand value and staff engagement, especially in a COVID environment. But certainly staff engagement and retention has played also a very key role alongside brand value in having them continue their organics diversion. And certainly last but not least, the development of a collective option for small and medium-sized food waste generators in advance of policy, we feel may set the market up for success. It really does enable these cost savings from the efficient routes to be passed on to businesses and institutions, especially the small and mid-sized masses of food waste generators across most cities and regions. We're going to be continuing to collect data from this pilot so that we can provide that onwards. It's both a summary of the amazing data we get from Second Harvest through their food rescue app, alongside our measurement of organics average organics diversion per business type and size, and we'll be sharing that out hopefully in a platform. And we want to make people aware that we continue to see increasing demand from municipalities looking to take action on IC&I organics for a variety of reasons. They're calling us, in relation to their urgent landfill space limitations, their climate commitments, and in some cases, some potential budget opportunities as EPR gets implemented across Ontario. So Haley, if I have time, I'm going to race through this last slide. I know we're slightly over time. Just want to give you a quick preview of next steps. We're not done yet, but we are moving into our final phase of this pilot. So we're recruiting, continuing to recruit and scale up our data capture. You've got some images there of the sensors that we're using to get really great data around the actual volumes of organics being produced at each generator. We are going to be trialing our collective procurement model and building out our membership-based collective model managed by a local organization. We have done some preliminary modeling around this business model, and you know, Maggie may have mentioned, but in a non-regulated environment, a partner with regional operations might be what we're looking for to achieve scale for financial viability in small and mid-sized cities. So that's something we certainly aim to share lots more with you after this final phase is done. I'm going to leave it there, and Haley can let us know if there's any time for questions.
Thanks for that, Katie. I'm actually, there are questions, and Haley, I know that we are running a little bit of time, but given that there are so many, if you're amenable, we can read a few out. So Katie, the first one's an easy one, and Maggie, thanks for that. What contamination rates were achieved?
Yeah, thanks to the ongoing support from Walker Industries at their All Treat Farms location, we've had consistent reports of less than 5% contamination rates, sort of across the mixed organics coming out of the pilot participants.
Right. And a call out here to share a little bit more on logistics, operational details for pickup in bins and frequency. So you know, I think people are trying to reimagine, especially those that have run municipal green bin programs or organics programs. Everybody down the street is onboarded, but one of the really real reasons we wanted to create this pilot and launch it is to try to, if you will, mimic what was done in the residential sector over to the IC&I sector, see if we can get some efficiencies, some scales, and some cost reductions. That was really, but you know, nice in concept and theory, but I know pulling them all together wasn't easy. So maybe can you just talk us through kind of the process in Guelph in particular? We're going to reimagine this in Alberta, but maybe you can talk about the experiences in Guelph in terms of, and the County of Wellington in terms of creating the route.
Well, we certainly, you know, as Maggie mentioned, the model does appear to be working for all 9 IC&I subsectors. We went actively out of our way to make sure that we had participants from all these subsectors so we could sort of confirm and trial that component. That looked like a mix of door knocking, you know, referrals from our network partners, and sort of the key site advisory service and feedback we get from the businesses is working through those on-site logistics is a key component of success on the IC&I organics diversion. These small businesses don't have the time and often the capacity to look at that. So getting in, making sure that we can reduce any process flow changes in their kitchens by providing them with the right size kitchen bins, working with them to understand where the outside 240-liter green rolly cart will actually be placed, and providing them with compostable bags, all details that are not insurmountable, but enough of a barrier that they, you know, the compostable bags, Maggie, I think you would agree, is the one that we kept getting the most appreciation around. Oh, thanks so much for dropping off these compostable bags. We really just wouldn't have gotten our heads around where to buy those. So some of these detailed pieces that and the advisory service component, so I think can't be understated.
That's great. And just to remind everybody about the geographies, if you haven't been to Guelph or the County of Wellington, I'm sure Cam and Doss would welcome you there. But not only did we try to, you know, route within the density of Guelph, but we tried to link it with some agriculture geography between the two towns, and we were trying to create a route between Guelph and the County of Wellington. So that's really important, and we're similarly, that's what we're trying to do with Strathcona and Westlock as well. So just to think about, how do we provide this service to smaller communities, linking them to larger, more dense ones is really, another key element of the design. Another question here for either of you on the issue of cost savings. I know, you've got a lot of data and experience in sifting through all of the costing data. How do businesses save costs from reduced garbage or not? Don't businesses have contracts with waste managements for set schedules for pickups, or were costs based on volumes, weights of waste materials?
That's something that we continue to work through with our businesses by providing some of the data. It's true that they do have contracts, and yet the data that we're able to provide on the amount, both volume and weight that they're taking out of their dumpster, we want to provide them that value in terms of renegotiating their garbage contract when it comes up for renewal. But so when we chat about it with the businesses, it's around, it should not be net new costs to the business. It's easiest to see in large businesses that have compactors. They experience those savings right away, usually in their contract model with tonnage reductions. So.
Staying on the theme of costs, and then we're going to move into the panel. We've got tons of questions, so we will take the time to answer them here as live as well. But on the theme of costs, Katie, there's a question here about long-term financing plans, which I know we're really moving into as we try to roll this pilot into a permanent program. We've got to think about costing if it's not scoped into the role of the local municipality. So I know we don't have a solid answer for this, but can you talk a little bit about the models that we've been looking at vis-a-vis long-term financing?
Around the collective model, Joe.
Correct.
Really our thoughts around packaging up, this pilot routing as a book of business for the private sector to or possibly the public sector to deliver service around, and through a membership based model, we're looking at invoicing the businesses, and in an ideal world, what we'd like to do is look at a weight-based business model. So that's why we've been trialing these sensors. Lots more in the interim report. So I'll try and answer it at a really high level, and you'll see lots more data as we collect and move forward. But essentially, in an ideal world, we'll have package up the route with the cost of the truck as a fixed cost that is split evenly amongst the businesses based on the number of carts they have. And what we'd like to have is an additional cost that reflects the actual food waste that's in the green bin, so that the smallest generators of food waste aren't penalized when they don't have a full cart of food waste, and see if that can incentivize food waste reduction, similar to a utility meter. So that's our dream, and we're still working to understand if the sensor technology can support that dynamic pricing model. But we will have enough data already. We have quite a bit of data to show sort of the differences in average weights and densities amongst the different types of IC&I and according to their size. So we'll share that out and continue to share that out.
So in other words, really, it's like a subscription model where you get access to the service and you pay a fee to get into it, and then you right size the cost based on what it is that you generate. Hopefully, and build out based on weight versus number of carts or volumes or trips and frequency, which is really common in the IC&I sector today. The heart of the model effectively is what we're trying is what you've just described there. So we have many questions that are coming in on the Q&A. So as we move into the next speaker, I might ask Katie and Maggie both just to take time and maybe pinch hit responding to those. And just for all of the delegates, if we don't get to your questions or you think of something post webinar, of course, our contact information will be available to you, so you can get a hold of us at any point in time. Reports will be coming, as Katie has mentioned, on this as well. So with that, thank you very much, Katie and Maggie. A plethora of interesting information and more to come from you. So thanks for that. As was mentioned, both by Dr. Parizeau, by Maggie, and by Katie, that we are really creating this pilot project in the absence of policy interventions that really create parameters or redirect markets to behave in a different way. But we hope that the information that we're gleaning from these pilot projects start to inform what policy could look like and the roles and responsibilities of the different levels of governments in terms of, or what roles they may play around policy development or reorganizing the markets to support this. So we're very pleased to have said policy creators with us today, both in terms of a federal level as well as those that were terrific hosts of our pilots. And with that, I'd like to start with Matthew Hamilton, a familiar face and name for those of us who have been in the waste world for some time. Matt is a manager of waste and greenhouse gas emissions at Environment and Climate Change Canada. He has over 25 years of engineering and management experience focused mainly on waste management. And for the past 15 of those years has been with ECCC leading waste management and pollution prevention programs. He's currently manager of ECCC's Waste Sector Greenhouse Gas Reduction Group, which is focused on developing new regulations to reduce landfill methane emissions, but also supportive initiatives to accelerate the biodegradable waste reduction and diversion in Canada. So with that introduction, Matthew, thank you for being with us. We're keen to hear how you are pursuing policies on food waste reduction and related greenhouse gas emissions. Handing the mic over to you.
Great, thanks, Joanne. I'm just gonna share my screen. And while I do that, I want to say the results of that pilot study, I think, are looking extremely interesting. And I wanted to also reiterate what Joanne just said, that from a policymaker point of view, pilot studies like this are very interesting because they do show us the art of what's possible. And therefore, they can inform what might happen if you were to scale these things up. So just to say congrats on that, I think we'll be watching because I think it's very interesting. Okay, so let's see here. Can I get this going? Yes. Okay. So as Joanne was saying, my role is really leading on the waste sector greenhouse gas reduction. The government obviously has like several targets that we're aiming for. 2030 is an important year, looking for big emission reductions by 2030. Also 2050 net zero. We're also a signatory to what's called the Global Methane Pledge. And that's part of our commitment on methane. Methane being one of the most potent greenhouse gases, and really because it's short-lived, any action we take on methane has a sort of faster response in the atmosphere than we do, say, when we're targeting CO2 emissions. So it's quite an important gas, and we really, that's a focus of my team's work. So we do a fair bit of work analyzing greenhouse gas emissions and so on. But just to say that, for our folks here, I mean, it won't be news to you that biodegradables are really the key source of landfill methane. And landfills in Canada, they're a big part of the methane story. They're the vast majority of waste sector emissions. And those emissions, they're on the order of, say, 23% or so of Canada's total methane emissions. So very important. And I think that people may not often know is that, we're looking at 2030, for example, for some of the methane targets we have on waste. But it's important to know that in the year 2030, like 40% of the methane emitted or generated, at that time, will be because of waste we disposed prior to 2020. So there's a very long period of time that as these materials accumulate in landfills, they tend to produce methane over, quite a long period of time. So, doing both things by reducing landfill methane at source, but also reducing disposal over time, both those things are what we need to do if we want to get emissions down in the long haul. So we also do some work in my group on characterizing the waste stream. In 2020, we put out a study that was trying to estimate, what's being disposed across the country. We're currently working on a new version of that study. So hopefully in 2024, we're going to be publishing. And incidentally, if you are the holder of waste audits or waste characterization data, we would love to hear from you. One of our challenging areas is, in fact, characterizing IC&I waste. We're able to do it to a degree, but the more information we have, obviously, the better. So we've actually gone out this year and acquired a bunch of new data on IC&I waste generation. But anyway, the 2020 data showed that about a quarter basically of all the waste that was being landfilled was food, and that was on the order of about 6 million tons a year from both residential and IC&I. So they're each about 3 million tons according to our data. So just important to understand, we are updating that, but that's where we are right now. We also, I wanted to highlight, a couple of years ago, we did a study on IC&I waste management, and we looked at food and organics and so on. But I think some of the key findings that, and this is not going to shock anybody, but, where there's no regulatory requirements, basically costs are driving decision making. So I think, for example, that pilot study we were just hearing about, what's interesting is if they're finding ways to reduce costs, even in an environment where there's no regulatory requirements, it does show there's maybe some more ground that could be covered there. So I think that's interesting. And of course, the diversion is still incrementally more expensive than disposal in most places. Now, where did we see that diversion was still happening? Of course, where there's regulatory requirements, you see this diversion occurring, but also in cases where there's some corporate social responsibility goals or these kinds of things. And of course, there's a large part of the IC&I that organics are actually liquid. So these aren't, we're not going to landfill with these materials, but things like biogas and so on, that's maybe a better home for that in the first place. And then also, there are these economic benefits that are appealing to certain generators and operators. And that's stuff like, renewable natural gas, for example. We've seen the growth of the demand for and thus the production of renewable natural gas in a couple of jurisdictions in Canada. And so this seems to be a bit of a trend there. The other thing I was going to share is, so we do a lot of different studies over the years, and I just was going to point out a few things. So of course, there's that IC&I study I just mentioned. We've also done a recent study on what role plastics are playing in organic waste diversion programs. Some programs allow them, some don't. So there's a really interesting findings in that report. If you're curious to see it, it's all available, so please let us know. We've also done some work to support some let's call it like behavior change type materials or educational materials for schools. So both like for the school in terms of waste management, but also for the students in terms of educational materials. So we've done some work there, or supported that, I should say. And also we've often worked with the United States and Mexico over the last 5 or 6 years on food loss and waste. And we've produced together some different tools. For example, there's a measurement tool. It's a practical guide for measuring. So I think that's a neat one, but there's several others that you may want to take a look at. I will highlight too, in 2019, we published a report which was called Taking Stock of Food Waste in Canada. And if you haven't seen it, it looked at the full life cycle of food waste in the country and trying to understand where the challenges and opportunities and so on were throughout the supply chain. And I'll be curious, frankly, to go back and look at that again in the light of, for example, the pilot project we were hearing about, to see, what parts of those challenges and so on are being addressed by this type of approach and so on. And what can we learn from that? So that's another point I was going to make. And yeah, so that's the whirlwind tour of, the kinds of things we're doing. I'll share that contact information. Of course, I can share the slides as well. I also will just say too, like our program, like a big focus is on landfill methane reduction, and we are developing new regulations. We've been consulting since 2021. Our aim is to publish draft regs this spring. So just to be aware of that. And we've also been, we've had a sort of what I would call like a modest funding program over the last several years. There's about $1 million a year for 4 years so far. And we've been funding various types of projects in Canada, whether it's on education and awareness for food waste or different materials in the stream, so textiles and different things like that. If you're curious about what those projects are, again, feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to share. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate that. And I hope you can stay on video because we're going to ask you to be part of the panel discussion as well. And we'll open up questions from the delegates in that context as well. So thanks so much for your presentation. If I can now move to another department of the federal government and ask Jason, pardon me, Diversion. You think that I would get your first name right and mess up your last name, but thanks so much for being with us. We're blessed to have you as the Director of Food Policy at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, really, emphasizing the connectivity that food waste has, both in terms of environmental impact related to food, to waste, as well as greenhouse gases, but this whole idea of connecting it to supporting more regenerative farming. And we're really hoping to prove some of that out with the experiment that we're doing in Alberta as well. So we're pleased to have you here as well. For those that haven't met Jason, he joined Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in 2003 and has had the opportunity to work on a broad range of files, including public trust, branding, sector strategies, value chain coordination, and international marketing. Jason was appointed to the Director of the Food Policy in September of 2018. Very lucky to have you here. If you could unmute and prep your presentation, Mike, over to you.
Oh, thanks so much. And unlike Michael, I don't have a presentation. It's just me. But I want to thank you and also say that bringing diverse partners, stakeholders, and orders of government together to tackle key challenges facing Canada's food systems, like food loss and waste, to improve social health, environmental, and economic outcomes, is at the heart of the food policy for Canada. And so super pleased to receive and accept the invitation to participate in this webinar. And so thank you so much, Joanne. Also want to echo Matt's comments and thank Katie and Maggie for explaining the pilot and outlining the successes and opportunities, as well as some of the key systems challenges and barriers that we need to collectively address to advance greater circularity. There's growing momentum, global momentum, to take action on the vast amounts of food loss and waste around the world. And this issue consistently is coming up and making its way on the agenda of various international organizations like the UN, the G7, the G20, the OECD, and APAC. And I think there's a real opportunity for Canada to build on our innovative work to date to become a global leader on this issue and develop and share our knowledge and solutions to drive sustainable food systems. So maybe just in terms of a bit of background, the Food Policy for Canada was launched in 2019 to better coordinate existing federal food-related investments and launch new initiatives to address critical, interconnected challenges facing Canada's food systems. The action areas of the policy work together to make nutritious and culturally appropriate food more affordable, accessible, and sustainable for people and communities in Canada, particularly equity-deserving groups. The food policies for Canada's work to date to tackle food loss and waste has been focused on critical investments and collaborative action to accelerate progress on preventing food loss and waste at the source and encouraging greater circularity in our food systems through diversion. For example, through opportunities like the development of value-added food and bioproducts. A key investment has been the $20 million Food Waste Reduction Challenge that was launched to accelerate the development and deployment of innovative solutions to reduce food loss and waste. It includes two streams, which I know you're familiar with, Joanne, given your success in the program. The business model stream focused on business solutions that can prevent or divert food waste at any point in the food chain from farm to plate. Last month, we announced the grand prize winners in this category. Loop Mission and Still Good received $1.5 million to grow and scale their solutions. The novel technology stream focused on technologies to extend the life of perishable food, transform food waste, and accelerate their advancement in the Canadian market. In January 2023, 6 finalists were selected to receive up to $450,000 each to test their technology in an operational environment. 2 grand prize winners will be announced this spring. A few examples of novel tech stream finalists and the running for the grand prize include Altex of Kitchener, Ontario. They're creating a biodegradable and carbon neutral textile re-engineered from food waste with the aim of replacing polyester. Carbon Lock Technologies of Winnipeg, Manitoba converts food waste into a stable form of biocarbon that sequesters atmospheric CO2, prevents future landfill methane emissions, and supports sustainable agriculture. And also just mention briefly Canova Bioworks of Fredericton, New Brunswick. They're using the power of mushrooms to improve the quality, freshness, and shelf life of food and beverage products. Some of the other kind of key work of the department was around the launching of a surplus food rescue program as part of the COVID-19 response to redirect surpluses that would otherwise be wasted due to supply chain disruptions. We've also taken action with our own facilities. Notably, fresh fruits and vegetables produced by agricultural research centers run by the department are now being donated to local charities. This also, we really think, sets the stage to expand this type of model to other federal departments, agencies that produce food or have food service related responsibilities to look towards the charitable donation model. So while investments from AFC and other actors with food systems continue to be critical, stakeholders have identified, and we certainly heard that today, the need for more coordinated, cohesive approach to reducing food loss and waste in Canada. And we really think a collaborative approach is required to prevent food loss and waste at the source wherever possible, and avoid unintended consequences of shifting the problem up or downstream in the supply chain. In 2021, Canada engaged in the United Nations Food Systems Summit, during which we held broad consultations through member state dialogues. In fact, over 360 organizations and stakeholders participated in Canada's 8 member state dialogues held between April and June 2021, including a dedicated dialogue on food loss and waste that included participation from provincial and municipal governments. So some of the key lessons were that participants identified many solutions to food loss and waste, and that leadership across the federal government was necessary to advance and establish a consistent and transparent approach to defining, measuring, and monitoring food loss and waste, and building collective commitments through specific reduction targets, and supporting hubs and networks to facilitate cross-sectoral collaboration. AFC also led, Agriculture for Canada led the development of a national pathways document, which included food loss and waste as a priority area. And maybe just to mention briefly that the work of the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council has also been quite instrumental in terms of our work on food loss and waste reduction. So just to close off before we go to the other speaker in the panel, want to note that at the 10th American Northern Leaders Summit in 2023, Canada committed to develop a food loss and waste reduction action plan by the end of 2025, outlining efforts to cut food loss and waste in half by 2030. And we very, very much look forward to expanding and deepening our engagement with diverse partners and stakeholders and orders of government to develop the action plan. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Jason. And your last comment about the action plan, maybe you could dump into the Q&A or the chat function. I think Q&A, everyone has access to that. How or where folks could get information about how they can get involved in developing that action plan or consultations around that action plan. That would be terrific. Thanks for that. We mentioned throughout the webinar today the critical importance of having brave and progressive hosts in the municipality partners that we have been able to unearth, willing to host the pilot project that we have been creating and are testing. And I want to bring them into the fold now. I'm going to introduce them. They have long bios, but if they could be patient with me, I'm just going to pick a sentence or two from them. But they are Leah Seaburk, who is the manager of waste management and community energy at Strathcona County, with over 20 years of service in public sector. Leah, as soon as she heard that we were fishing about in other jurisdictions around the country for this pilot, grabbed on right away and pulled us into Alberta. We were thrilled with that. And she is doing some terrifically progressive things in that municipality and beyond. So thanks, Leah, for being with us today. And we have to also give shout outs to Cam Walsh. If you don't know Cam, he is the division manager of solid waste and resources at the city of Guelph, and has been with them for 29 years of experience in the environmental industry, and is definitely a leader in Guelph and beyond, and again has been such a champion of our organization and the things that we're trying to do. and I would say is the epitome of patience. We appreciate you being with us, Cam, and again, your support. And then last but not least, certainly Das Salego. If Das is the manager of solid waste services at the County of Wellington. And we worked really closely with DOS and Cameron, who work closely together to try to perfect, obviously efficient waste management, recycling in the county and in the city together. They are hand in glove, but were terrific co-hosts for us and gave us really this interesting opportunity with the Guelph experiment to try to mesh, if you will, a denser urban center like Guelph and its more dispersely populated rural area that DOS is in charge of. So our 3 municipal champions, thank you so much for being with us today and supporting the pilot project. So if you could also unmic as well. And I'm going to take on Dr. Parizeau again. Kate, if you could on mic and come on screen. I would like to include you in the panel discussion as well. We've got a bit of time left for a panel. So I wanted to just kind of pull the threads of the conversation today and throw out some questions with all of your experience and knowledge, both in terms of policymaking and operating and researching to bring to life a bit of a discussion here. And the first question that I sort of have to ask, maybe I'm going to pick on Kate first. In your view, what's not getting enough attention in terms of challenges, in particular in the IC&I food loss and waste arena, given that we know by fact and by research that is the largest sector generating the most food and food waste of all sources?
I would say right from the outset, we don't have a strong baseline. So we know in many ways, anecdotally, that there is so much food loss and waste happening in this sector. And yet, generally speaking, there aren't strong regulations to make sure that we're hearing regularly from different actors across the IC&I sector how much food waste and how much food loss they're actually generating. So we don't even really know how much is there. We have some estimates. I saw somebody posted in the comments that Second Harvest and Value Chain Management International are doing another study. That will be a great touchstone, but there might be room for more regular reporting, mandated reporting on some of these issues. And then I think, as I said, a big part of the problem is we have these interesting initiatives happening in lots of different places. We've heard about a number of them today. I think we need to see more joined up effort across jurisdictions, across scales, across silos. Really interesting work happening. And yet there are very real reasons why it's been difficult to bring those different groups together.
Yeah, agreed. And maybe just picking up the thread of mandated reporting, and I'll open it up to everybody here. There is lots of discussions about roles and responsibilities around food and lost waste in particular. Happy to see the leadership taken at AAFC as well as ECCC. We don't have a provincial rep on our panel today, but we know we have them in the audience, and they're going to be a key player in terms of policy as well. And then the municipalities, quite frankly, are where it's at. That's where rubber hits the road. They're the ones trying to deal with filling up landfills. Really many of them have created climate emergency plans that include targeting food and food loss waste as one of the key local areas or local items that they have to be dealing with to hit some of their targets as well. So you talk about mandated reporting, you talk about a lack of sort of policy interventions. How do you see, and I'll stay with you, Kate, and then I'm going to ask the same question of everybody in the panel, where do you see government intervention being most needed? Roles, whose role do you think it is to intervene with policy, or is there a different role that each of the levels of government should be playing?
Yeah, I do think that there's room across different scales of government, different organizations. The fact that, for example, we have ECCC and AAFC both here shows that this is an issue that crosses different mandates. And I think that, again, that's part of the problem. It's not that we don't have smart and dedicated people who are working on this topic, both within government and outside of it. It's that this is one of those wicked problems. So I think I think that's where we need to start coordinating and saying, how does this issue connect to what people are eating? How does it connect to farm production? How does it connect to environmental issues. So much of it is logistic as well. And honestly, a big part of it is funding. Again, municipalities, the municipal scale, we're seeing that they're doing the heavy lifting. They're on the front. They're at the front of this work, and yet they are the least funded level of government out there. And they're getting pinched by many of the different forces that we're seeing out there right now, things like the housing crisis, for example. So we need to have that kind of policy coordination. And I think we need to have some bigger funding conversations too.
Thanks for that. That bleeds nicely into opening up the mics of our municipal champions as well. Feel free to react to the roles and responsibilities questions or anything that you've heard Dr. Parizeau say in terms of supports that you might need.
I don't mind wading into this dialogue at this point. You know, it's as a wicked problem, as Kate has characterized this issue of food loss and waste, and climate change is another one of those. It really takes a lot of cross-pollination, a lot of interjurisdictional cooperation, and you know, you just look at the divisions about who's responsible for what. And you know, in the municipal realm, as you said, this is where the rubber meets the road. And in fact, from a climate change perspective, over 50% of greenhouse gas emissions can be controlled at the municipal level, you know, through our operations, our services that we provide. And when you look at authority for waste management across Canada, that's at the provincial level. And, you know, we've got here in Ontario a goal of 50% diversion by 2030. And the residential sector is really doing their part. They're at or above 50%. And there's only so much juice you can squeeze out of the municipal residential orange. And then you need to start looking at the IC&I sector. And that's really where regulations and obligations would help drive innovation and create carrots, sticks, what have you, to incentivize that sector to make changes, to reduce their food loss and waste, be more efficient, and come up with innovative strategies that are going to build jobs. And just one last point, I'm speaking a mile a minute here, but there's a lot of great content to discuss on these topics. The Ministry of the Environment here in Ontario has identified that diversion activities create 10 times more jobs than just simply disposing a ton of waste in landfill. And so if there are these regulations that can help spur innovative approaches, it's also creating jobs. It's really a triple bottom line approach.
The economic development opportunities and job creations are often not quantified and talked about enough. So thank you for reminding us, Dos, that there is an economic development opportunity here, and a local one at that. So thanks for that. Leah, Cam, Cam, go ahead.
No, Leah, after you.
Sure. So I appreciate the point that was just made about residential piece, because municipalities have been so active. Like, we do have a lot of the tools in our bag to start working with IC&I, and in our community, like, we've just developed a roadmap. And one of the strongest things that we heard out of public engagement is this continuity across our community, and to stop focusing just on residential, this larger piece at play. And so our residents are almost demanding it, which is kind of what's pushed us into this IC&I sector. But we can't do it alone. So we know, especially here in Alberta, landfilling is some of the cheapest. And so one of the biggest concerns we have is the cost of landfilling in comparison to these diversion programs and stuff. So that's definitely a higher jurisdiction than just us here at the municipal level. And then, of course, funding, it was already mentioned, that would be another piece that definitely would bring a lot of value to municipal programs.
Fascinating that it came from the community, and already seeing the disconnected or the disjointedness between residential services and what can happen at work or in the IC&I sector. Cam, thoughts from you?
Yeah, thank you. I was really encouraged to hear the presentations from our federal partners on the call today, and thank you very much for that. One of the things for me is really renewed consultation around this matter regarding IC&I. So the federal plan to create a food loss and waste action plan, I think, is a great initiative. It can leverage, I think, the provincial food loss and waste action plan, which I think has maybe lost some of its traction through COVID, but was still an excellent plan as well. And in particular, what's outstanding from that is the landfill ban. So there's no timeline on that really that's firmed up. That provides the context to value landfill space properly. That provides the context to create the business case for diversion. So it's there. I think there's some trepidation around implementing it. I think a firm timeline helps, a firm and confident timeline helps to stimulate investment and stimulate the programs and actuate the types of tools such as provisions, or sorry, second harvest tool, the tool that was mentioned in terms of calculating and supporting businesses to support diversion. So a key catalytic piece for me is the ban at transfer station. It is in the current provincial plan, and it really helps to create the right context to then stimulate the circular economy around the organics framework in particular. So I think we're there in terms of the knowledge piece of it. It's that catalytic piece, and it's the confident policy piece that we're really in alignment with the federal, provincial, and then what we can leverage from a municipal perspective is our convening potential. So we have the connections with the businesses, we have the connections through our economic development in the residents, and so on and so forth. So we can all play a very important role in accelerating this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Cam. Certainly a ban from landfill changes. It's a blunt instrument that changes the dynamics in the market and behavior change pretty quickly. So appreciate the comments. You know, in this vacuum of policy action at a provincial level for things such as bans, because they're not common across the country. You know, we are seeing the likes of Strathcona and yourselves and DAW sort of step into the space where typically municipalities, you know, saw their mandates only in the residential sector, are now saying, well, for me to build economies of scale, especially for food loss and waste, you're not going to get investment if you don't have dedicated clean supply of organics. And so it's a chicken and the egg thing. And in order to attract the investment, you need to be able to guarantee supply, and you're not going to see private sector. Private sector just does not have the coordinating skills, the convening skills that you talk about. So while we wait for provinces to catch up to you and to really to put that on the fore of their plans, is there a role, should there be a role for municipalities to step into the IC&I sector? And maybe I'll ask all three of you to sort of respond to that. And I might want to say, in a context now where you're seeing producers take on responsibilities through EPR of other aspects of what was traditionally the municipal role on packaging. So with that context in mind, do you want to respond first, Cam?
Sure, thank you. I think for us to, that would be a service level discussion. So our service levels are established based on the taxes we receive and the revenues we receive from user fees. So for us to venture into a whole other area that's really not in our mandate is a bigger discussion that is really a service level discussion. There would be a need to collect taxes and so on and so forth to support that. We'd also be encroaching on private sector offerings, which is not necessarily a desirable role for a municipality to play. We want we want the private sector to function and be profitable in the types of work that the CIC pilot that really helps to identify the barriers to uptake and things like that. So I think our role again is catalytic, convening, supporting our businesses to be more efficient, supporting our businesses to leverage connectivity, funding, and so on and so forth. But getting in the way is something that municipalities do. When I say getting in the way, providing the service, when no one else is able to do it. So we're not in these businesses because they're fun to do. It's because we can provide them at the economies of scale and so on and so forth. So to venture into that is a bigger discussion for us. However, to support the businesses, to support the scale and support scale up, I think is really where we'd like to be as a catalytic role from my perspective. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Leah.
So when we did some public engagement with our business community, a couple of things we heard was there's awareness that they know that they have a role to play and that they have to start stepping up, but they also essentially ask government to us municipal, come in and help facilitate. So I think for municipalities, there just needs to be a shift. We're so used to being service providers on the residential side that we need to start shifting in what that looks like with IC&I. And our Municipal Government Act here in Alberta allows us to regulate that space. So I think there will be a rule to eventually to regulate or enable some sort of policy. But in the meantime, they're looking for the carrots for us to play. So it's like these, the incentives, the storytelling, help showcase some of the champions. And that's why this pilot project has been so perfect for us, because it allows us to start to introduce that into our community, knowing that down the road, we will likely take a more regulator approach, and that our role will become a facilitator, an educator, an outreach in this space. So that's...
So not unlike what Cam's suggesting in terms of convening, but really front-ending it to try to get a little bit of experience and grow a bit of interest and feedback data really back to you as well. Excellent, interesting juxtaposition there. Doss, from your perspective?
Yeah, Wellington County has a landfill, which those of us who operate in this industry in Ontario are well aware that there's a landfill capacity crisis, which is essentially looming if it's not here already. And I'm not trying to be alarmist about that, but it's just the facts when you look at the numbers. So for us, we have an active interest in keeping waste out of our landfill, whether that's generated in the residential sector or generated in the IC&I sector. And so we've always taken a pretty active approach at providing services to the IC&I sector. And so the Circular Innovation Council pilot that we've undertaken to divert food and organic waste from landfill has been really a perfect fit. And even looking at things like the Blue Box program, which is the transition to full producer responsibility, is well underway here in the province. And so we're looking at gaps that the regulations don't speak to in looking at obligations at the IC&I sector, and we're trying to fill those gaps, and hopefully the regulations catch up in the not too distant future. So we see it as within our interest to try to keep this material out of our landfill site. And it also has a complementary goal of, we've got greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And so those are all very complementary goals when we're talking about waste reduction and diversion.
Excellent. I might turn to our federal friends at the Government of Canada. Anything that you've heard that you want to comment on? I mean, certainly the local level operations is really what's going to drive the bus here, and looking to you to sort of set the conditions to allow them, give them the space to do that. So role of the federal government, and I don't want to put you on the spot, and I know you can't speak officially, but I'll off the record, let's say, observations from you in terms of where you think the federal government can play a supportive role.
Maybe I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Matt.
Yeah, no, you're being brave. That's great. Go, Jason.
Well, maybe I'll just reflect on some of the comments heard, and I think Dr. Parza was singing some of the food policy hits when she was talking about linkages from food loss and waste to other important policies and decisions across food systems, such as food safety, food labeling, healthy eating, food literacy, procurement, and sustainability. And I think these linkages can provide opportunities to address possible causes of food loss and waste and leverage opportunities to help advance food loss and waste reduction. And I think that really builds on Kate's comments as well, where the case for change was being brought forward, which spoke to not only environment, but also social and economic. And I think that's very powerful in terms of resonating with a wide range of policymakers, and to bring forward the multiple benefits that come about through greater circularity and food loss and waste reduction. And then reflecting on CAM and some of the municipal perspectives, and what we've heard from stakeholders and partners from across Canada's food systems is the need to have improved coordination and predictability across the various orders of government. We do view there as being a key federal role in terms of we're going to have common definitions to work towards measurement. There was data to support. I saw in the chat that the mention of the research being led by Second Harvest to kind of build on their study from 5 years ago, and certainly encourage everybody to participate in that. But that's where we see initially, at least, the role of the federal government, and very much look forward to working with orders of government as well as various partners and stakeholders from across Canada's food systems to better define how we can address what was characterized by Dr. Parzo as a wicked issue.
We're all going to use that phrase now. Thanks for that, Kate. Matt.
Yeah, I think I'll share this. Whenever we're looking at policy development, it's always evidence-based first, right? So a big challenge, as we all can acknowledge, is let's say the gaps in data. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do in my group is assemble more information on how things are going, basically. And that's not just waste data, like in terms of tonnages, but also the variety of programs and approaches across the country. For example, we're noting that there are certain municipalities in the country that are taking action on IC&I, and other parts of the country, it seems to be less clear that they're either interested or able, et cetera, right? So we're looking at like what is that? What's driving these decisions? Because it's part of what we're interested in. Obviously, as I said, my group focuses on GHG reduction, and so everything kind of circles back to that issue. But I think so. Yeah, the measurement piece is important. One of the things, another thing I want to mention. So yesterday was federal budget day, and there were a couple of things in the budget that link to this. Let's say they're not necessarily like going to solve all the problems that we've seen, but one of them was that there was an announcement of new infrastructure funding for municipal infrastructure, and I would say solid waste infrastructure was specifically mentioned. I'll give myself a tiny pat on the back there because we were involved in trying to make that happen. So the detail of that would be allocated. So just to say though that there could be some scope in there for assisting municipalities with infrastructure needs, and let's see where that could extend to. The other thing was that there was an announcement about biofuels, and so some additional funding support for biofuels, which again, it's a little derivative of what we're talking about. But if biofuel producers can access more high quality material, and they can, get some funding to support the build out of their facility, like these are all kind of greasing the wheel, right? A little bit. So the government, I'd say that's one of the approaches it's been taking. Is to where it could surgically be of use on the financial side. So let's see how those two go forward. And there's other examples of that, whether it's like supporting technology build out and things like that, with Sustainable Development Technology Canada and some previous Infrastructure Canada investments. So I think those are interesting things to keep watching and think about. And then for my group's part, part of our mandate is to look, so we were doing landfill gas regs, right? That's the kind of regulatory angle the department and the government chose to pursue at this time. But on the other side, we're also trying to accelerate action around diversion, energy recovery from like biodegradables, et cetera, right? So what are we doing? Right now, we're developing a report, which we hope to publish later this year, that it will be a bit of a taking stock of how organic waste is managed in Canada. How is it going? What are the challenges and the opportunities that are out there? And we will try to take a particular focus on residential, multi-residential as well, but also IC&I. So a bit of an examination of each of those things. And I'm hoping that some of the data that we acquired in the last year on IC&I waste diversion is going to be informative there. It's going to give us a little bit more insight than, say, just a national roll-up. So that's something. And then part of, again, we're always in a mode of examining policy options. So, part of my group's job is to go out in the world, look at what's happening, and try to generate policy ideas for the government's consideration at the right time. I obviously don't get to make all the choices, but I get the privilege of providing the advice and the where I see opportunities. So for us, it's always critical though that we can properly describe the cost benefit analysis. So the data is important on flows of materials, on program costs, like your pilot project is instructive, for example, these kinds of things. And we try to pull that together to say, okay, if the government was interested in taking some action, what would be some likely areas? Where might it be most acceptable and interesting to Canadians that we do that as well? You know, and where can we work with provinces and territories as partners, municipalities as well? So, you know, there's a lot of factors there, but just to say that is part of our job, and we are working on that in the next year or two. It just happens that the funding cycle for my program starts to wind down, and so we'll be bringing forward new options. I want to just, if I could say one more thing, we did, in the course of developing these landfill methane regulations, we did ask stakeholders their thoughts on diversion and whether or not diversion should find its way into a methane regulation. So just to kind of, you know, go digress a tiny bit, we have the authority to regulate methane emissions, okay? Just like we have the authority right now to regulate single-use plastic items is another thing where it's listed specifically in the Environmental Protection Act. Regulating organic waste management is not listed in the Environmental Protection Act as a specific activity. So if and as we would consider regulation, we have to look at it from a lens of a toxic substance like methane. So what are we doing to try to reduce methane emissions? And yeah, obviously diversion plays a role. But what we've chosen to do in the regulatory approach for now is we're going to leave it to landfills to determine the best approach to reduce methane. We're going to set a performance-based target that they need to meet. And so if it's through a combination of more or better landfill gas capture plus diversion over time, like these are all within the options that are available. But the limits on methane will be, let's say, equivalent to the most stringent in North America. Okay, that's the idea. As I say, that's our current proposal. And so like something like California and Oregon, for example, those are sort of where the most stringent rules are. So we're adopting some of those, but we're also proposing to adopt parts of provincial legislation that sort of form the best one piece of legislation for the country. So there's elements from those, but just say, you know, it's a performance-based approach. So that's what we're proposing, and diversion could play a role. Okay, so anyway, those are my thoughts.
No, really
thanks.
critical for us to understand the parameters under which you are drafting policy. So we see things, the world through your lens. It's critical for us to see. So a call out to us to really be thinking about the connectivity between food waste and loss and emissions really as a priority. So that's important to know and to think about. And thanks for the call out to the fresh off the printer budget that has financial opportunities for municipalities and infrastructure and programming. So thanks for that as well. And we'll do our best to dig into the budget. We have not done so yet related to this, but we'll try to make those call outs and roll those out and send them out to our members and beyond as well. We're at time a little bit beyond. So a couple things in closing. Certainly, thank you very, very much to all of you for taking the time. A shout out to Maggie and Haley and to Katie for all the heavy lifting and the work that creates the webinars like this. It's a ton of work, as you all know, so thank you for that. A couple of things I mentioned, if you're not a member, to the delegates of the organization, please come to us and chat to us about doing so. We are also actively looking for other community hosts of the next iteration of this pilot project across the country. So that, again, to Katie's point, we can demonstrate replicability, we can progress and work on the things that we've already learned in previous pilots, but then demonstrate that it can happen anywhere in Canada, small, medium, large size of municipalities, or those that want to work together, as is the case here in Wellington and Guelph and Strathcona and Westlock as well. And the last thing that I will say is you will see our reports, interim reports on all of the pilot work that we've done so far We'll be sending those out in draft to our members and stakeholders. We'd love your comments on what we've learned and your thoughts about how we can progress this work. It's important. We really want to expand on the data that we've already collected, both in terms of environmental impact, economic opportunity, and social benefit as well. So those key KPIs and the data that we're amassing, really critical to us, and interested in measuring based on weight through sensors, which is real time and accurate, not something we've seen before in the IC&I sector. And this model of subscription, which really allows the SME part of our IC&I sector to get access to the service that's right-sized in terms of pricing. So more to come on that as well. A shameless plug here, if you've not seen yesterday as a year out from our 2025 Circular Economy Summit, which we co-host with the Circular Economy Leadership Canada. We're hosting it in Montreal with the 3 organizations here. We're going to have a dedicated stream of conversations on food and food loss waste, as well as regen ag. So if you haven't been to the summit, you can look at the 2023 summary on has a dedicated website. We're very much looking forward to continuing that conversation there, revealing our reports, and a lot of work will be done with our organizations between now and then. So to all of our delegates, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. We want more ideas, more information, more questions. Keep them coming to our speakers and participants and panelists. Thank you very much for taking the time and bringing your expertise. We look forward to continuing our work. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone.